The roar of motorcycle engines echoed through the quiet town as the sun dipped below the horizon. The neon signs flickered outside a rundown bar on the outskirts, where a group of men stood huddled together, laughing and tossing back their drinks. They called themselves the Iron Fangs, a local biker gang known for their tough, unwelcoming attitude, especially toward outsiders. And in their eyes, few were more of an outsider than the man rolling up on his custom black and gold Harley. He was different from them in every way. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a confident stance, his presence alone sent a ripple of unease through the gang. His skin was dark, his jacket worn but clean, the emblem of a different club stitched proudly on the back. He wasn't from around here, and that, in their world, was enough to make him a target. A few of the men exchanged glances, smirking, their body language shifting. This wasn't a place where strangers were welcomed with open arms, especially not his kind. One of them, a stocky man with a shaved head and a deep scar along his jaw, leaned against his bike, arms crossed. His name was Jax, the leader of the Iron Fangs. He had a reputation for being ruthless, someone who didn't take kindly to those who didn't belong. The black biker slowed his ride, pulling up just a few feet from them. He killed the engine, the silence thick between them, then swung his leg off the seat, standing tall. His eyes scanned the group, unreadable. He wasn't here for trouble. He was here for something more important. Jax let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "You lost, boy?" he asked, his voice laced with sarcasm, just loud enough for the others to snicker. The biker didn't flinch. He adjusted his gloves, calm as ever. "Not lost," he said, his voice steady. "Just passing through. Thought I'd stop for a drink." The way he said it, like he had every right to be there, made a few of the men tense up. They weren't used to that. Usually, people like him knew better than to walk into their space. Jax took a step forward, eyes narrowing. "This ain't your kind of place," he muttered, barely concealing the edge in his tone. The biker met his gaze, unwavering. "Looks like a bar to me," he said simply, "and I don't see a sign saying otherwise." The air crackled with tension. A couple of the gang members shifted, waiting to see what Jax would do. He could tell the man wasn't scared. If anything, he carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from experience, from knowing he could handle whatever came his way. That irritated Jax more than he liked to admit. But before he could say anything else, the rumble of more motorcycles cut through the air. The sound grew louder, closer, until another group of riders appeared from the highway. Their headlights cast long, eerie shadows as they approached, slowing to a halt near the bar. Their bikes gleamed under the dim light, their riders just as tough-looking as the Iron Fangs. But there was something different about them. They weren't here to pick a fight. The black biker smirked slightly, tilting his head, as if he had been expecting this. He turned to Jax, eyes sharp. "You might want to listen before you make a mistake you can't take back," he said quietly. Jax stiffened, glancing at the approaching riders. He didn't like surprises, and this was starting to feel like one he hadn't prepared for. His grip tightened around the beer bottle in his hand. The rest of his crew straightened up waiting. Then one of the new riders pulled off his helmet, a middle-aged man with streaks of gray in his beard, his eyes filled with something that wasn't hostility, but something even more unsettling, understanding. "Evening, boys," the older rider said, his voice carrying over the quiet street. "Hope we're not interrupting anything." Jax's jaw clenched. He didn't like this at all. "Depends," he said slowly, eyes flicking between the black biker and the newcomers. "Who the hell are you?" The older rider chuckled, stepping forward. "Just some folks who've been where you are," he said, "and know where it leads." For the first time that night, Jax felt something he wasn't used to. Unease. Because somehow he knew this wasn't just about one black biker walking into the wrong bar. This was something bigger. And whether he liked it or not, it was about to change everything. Jax's fingers twitched against the neck of the beer bottle in his grip. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the eyes of his crew locked onto him, waiting for his move. The new group of bikers had parked just feet away, their presence a silent challenge, or maybe something else. Jax wasn't sure yet. But he didn't trust it. He didn't trust them. The black biker, who still hadn't given his name, stood firm, unfazed. He had a quiet kind of power, the kind that didn't need loud threats or wild gestures. It was in the way he carried himself, in the way he didn't react to Jax's taunts or the stares of the others. He wasn't afraid, and that unsettled Jax more than he wanted to admit. The older biker who had spoken, the one with the grey-streaked beard, took a slow step forward, his boots crunching against the gravel. His face was lined with experience, the kind that came from miles on the road and stories no one wrote down. His eyes flicked to the black biker, then back to Jax, like he understood something Jax didn't. "We've been down this road before," the older man said, his voice steady, "and it don't lead anywhere good." Jax scoffed, rolling his shoulders back. "That's so." His voice was sharp, but there was an edge of something else creeping in, something uncertain. The older man nodded. "I know what you're thinking. That you built this, that this is your place. That it belongs to you and no one else." His gaze swept over the other Iron Fangs, holding their attention. "But what happens when the world gets bigger than your crew? When you wake up one day and realize the road don't belong to just you?" Jax clenched his jaw. "We ain't got a problem," he said, though even he could hear the defensiveness in his voice. The black biker finally spoke, his voice even and calm. "Then prove it." The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and lingering. The Iron Fangs shifted on their feet, their bravado cracking just slightly under the weight of the moment. No one had come here looking for a fight. Not really, but the tension was real, and everyone felt it. Jax could feel his crew waiting for his response. He had spent years building his reputation, making sure that when people saw the Iron Fangs, they knew what to expect. They ruled these streets, even if the town itself was small and half forgotten. And now, this stranger, this black biker, was standing there, acting like that meant nothing. Jax wasn't sure what irritated him more, the quiet challenge in the man's stance, or the nagging voice in the back of his head that told him the older biker was right. His fingers tapped against the glass of the bottle. He had to do something. One of the younger members of the Iron Fangs, a wiry guy named Deke, suddenly stepped forward, his frustration bubbling over. "Why the hell are we even standing here listening to this?" he snapped, looking around. "They think they can just roll in here and tell us how things work." His eyes locked onto the black biker. "This is our town." The black biker's expression didn't change. "And what does that mean to you?" he asked, his voice steady. Deke's jaw tightened, but he hesitated, like he wasn't sure how to answer. The older biker exhaled, shaking his head. "This ain't about turf," he said. "It never is. It's about fear." He looked at Jax now, reading him like an open book. "I know because I used to be you." Jax stiffened. The older man nodded, like he saw the reaction and understood it. "I led a crew just like yours once. Thought we had everything figured out. We kept to our own, we didn't trust outsiders, and we made sure they knew it." He paused. "Until the day came when we needed help, and no one was there." Jax narrowed his eyes. "What are you talking about?" The older man took a slow breath. "One night, my club got into it with a rival crew. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal, just a standoff. Some words thrown around, maybe a few fists flying." His expression darkened. "But it got ugly. Fast." The other bikers listened, even the ones who had been standing back, pretending they weren't interested. The older man continued. "We were outnumbered, got backed into a corner. And all the people we pushed away, the folks we told didn't belong, they were the ones who could have helped us." His voice was heavy with memory. "But they didn't. They had no reason to. Why would they?" Silence settled over the group. Jax's grip on the bottle tightened. He wanted to dismiss it, to act like it was just some old story that had nothing to do with him. But deep down, he knew better. The black biker finally moved, taking a slow step forward. "The road don't care who you are," he said. "The road doesn't belong to one kind of man." His voice was quiet but firm. "It belongs to all of us." Jax stared at him, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. He wanted to push back, to throw out some sharp remark, but the words wouldn't come. Because for the first time, he wasn't sure he believed them. And that scared him more than anything else. Jax stood there silent, his grip still tight on the bottle. His crew was watching, waiting for him to say something, to do something. He had spent years leading the Iron Fangs, making sure they were feared, respected. He had built walls, between them and outsiders, between them and people who didn't look like them, didn't ride with them. And yet, here was this black biker standing in front of him, challenging everything Jax thought he knew. The older biker's words lingered in his mind. What happens when the world gets bigger than your crew? For years, Jax had convinced himself that loyalty meant keeping things the way they were, protecting their space from change. But now, standing face to face with a man who had no fear in his eyes, he felt something shift inside him. He didn't want to admit it, but a part of him knew. If things ever went south, if real trouble came knocking, who would be there for them? Would they be alone, the way that old biker's crew had been? Dick, still fired up, took a step toward the black biker, his fists clenched. "Nah, this is bull." Jax lifted a hand, stopping him. Dick froze, confused. Jax exhaled, then tossed his beer bottle to the side. It shattered against the pavement, but he didn't care. His mind was racing, fighting itself. The anger, the pride, the years of being told things had to be a certain way. It all clashed with something new. A quiet understanding. He looked at the black biker, searching his face for any sign of weakness, of doubt. But the man just stood there, steady, waiting. Jax swallowed hard. Then, after what felt like forever, he spoke. "What's your name?" The black biker studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Malik." Jax nodded back, like that meant something. Maybe it did. Maybe it was the first crack in the walls he had spent so long building. The older biker smiled slightly, like he had seen this moment play out before. He clapped a hand on Malik's shoulder. "Told you," he murmured. Malik smirked, but said nothing. The tension in the air eased, just a little. The other bikers shifted uncomfortably, uncertain of what had just happened. Dick still looked like he wanted to argue, but for once, he kept his mouth shut. Jax turned to his crew. "Ain't about giving up who we are," he said, his voice gruff but firm. "But maybe it's time we stop acting like the road only belongs to us." No one spoke, but something in the way the others glanced at each other told him they were listening. Really listening. Jax let out a breath. "Drinks are inside," he muttered, jerking his head toward the bar. Then to Malik he added, "If you're still thirsty." Malik met his gaze, then gave a small, knowing nod. "I could use a drink." Jax turned and walked inside without another word. One by one, his crew followed, some slower than others, but none of them protested. Malik exchanged a glance with the older biker, then followed them in. The bar door swung shut behind them, the sound of bikes humming in the background. The road was still there, stretching beyond the horizon, unchanged. But something was different now. Maybe it wasn't about who owned the road. Maybe it was about who you were willing to ride it with.